I found out my husband was sleeping with my younger sister. And the moment I realized it, I was sitting right across from both of them at the dinner table, smiling and passing them the breadbasket. My name is Layla Grace Merritt. I'm 34 now. 2 years ago I was 32 and I thought I had a life I understood. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio. Nothing dramatic about the childhood. 2 parents who stayed married and occasionally seemed like they even liked each other. An older brother, Marcus, who moved to Seattle and calls on holidays. And Priya, my younger sister by 3 years, the beautiful one, the one everyone always said was going places. I met Daniel at a work conference. I was a logistics analyst. He was there for a panel on supply chain systems. He spilled coffee on my notebook, genuinely, not as a move, and then spent 10 minutes apologizing and offering to replace it, which was such an oddly earnest response that I laughed and said it was fine and gave him my number. We dated for 2 years. We got married on a Saturday in October. It rained. We didn't care. Priya was my maid of honor. She gave a speech at the reception. She said I was the person she called when the world stopped making sense. She cried a little at the end, the real kind, not the pretty kind. I cried too. Daniel put his hand on my back and I leaned into him and thought, this is it. This is the whole thing right here. I think about that speech sometimes. I think about it more than I want to. The first thing I noticed was small. So small I filed it away without a label and forgot about it for weeks. Daniel started going to the gym in the evenings. This wasn't unusual. He'd always been someone who exercised, but it shifted. He used to go mornings. Suddenly it was 7 p.m., sometimes 8. He'd come home showered. I thought nothing of it. Gyms have showers. People use them. Then Priya started canceling plans. She lived 20 minutes away. We had a standing lunch every other Sunday, had kept it for 3 years. In a 4-month stretch she canceled 6 times. Headache. Work project. Car trouble twice. I wasn't hurt exactly. I was confused. Priya and I had survived a lot. Our grandmother dying, a bad year my parents had when I was in college, the version of me that barely spoke to anyone for 6 months after a job I'd loved was eliminated. She'd always shown up. I texted her once. Everything okay? She replied. Totally fine, just overwhelmed lately, love you. Totally fine. 2 words I now cannot read without a specific feeling behind my sternum. I didn't push. That's the thing I sit with. I didn't push because I trusted her. Because it didn't occur to me that the 2 things were related. I work remotely. I have for 4 years. My home office is on the 2nd floor. Small room. East-facing window, good light in the mornings. Daniel's schedule took him downtown 3 days a week, home Tuesdays and Thursdays. On a Tuesday in March I was on a call that ended early. I came downstairs to make tea. Daniel was in the kitchen. He was on his phone and he was smiling at something on the screen, not a regular smile, a specific kind. Private. The kind you make when something is meant only for you. He looked up and the smile changed. Not disappeared. Changed. I said his call ended early? He said yeah, client pushed it. He put the phone face down on the counter, which he had never done before. Daniel was not a face-down phone person. We'd been together 6 years. I knew his habits the way you know your own handwriting. I made my tea. I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk and I did not open my laptop for 11 minutes. I know because the screensaver kicked in and I watched it and thought very carefully about what I had just seen. Not the smile exactly. The change in it. The speed of the change. I didn't do anything that day. But something in me quietly opened a file and started keeping notes. Here is something about me that is relevant. I am not impulsive. I never have been. My brother Marcus says I was born 40 years old. My therapist, I had one later, said I tend to intellectualize as a defense mechanism. Maybe both things are true. What I did over the next 3 weeks was pay attention. Not in a dramatic way. Not following him, not going through his things. Just watching. The way you watch something when you're not sure what you're looking at yet. He started keeping his phone on his person more. Charging it on his nightstand instead of on the kitchen counter the way he always had. He started working late on Fridays, not every Friday but enough that I noticed. I noticed that he mentioned Priya less. He used to reference her casually, your sister said this Priya was asking about, and that stopped. Which sounds like nothing. But absence has a shape when you know what was there before. I also noticed that I was sleeping badly. Not from stress exactly. From something underneath stress that didn't have a name yet. My body was logging information my brain was still refusing to process. I want to be fair to myself here. I wasn't in denial. I was being careful. There's a difference. At least I think there is. It was my brother Marcus who accidentally handed me the first real piece. He came through town for a work trip in April. We had dinner, the 3 of us, me, Daniel, Marcus, at a restaurant downtown. It was a good night. Marcus is easy company. Daniel and he have always gotten along. At the end of the night, walking to our cars, Marcus said something offhand. He said, by the way, is Priya doing okay? I saw her Instagram post from that hotel in Asheville and she looked kind of off. You know how she gets when she's spiraling. I said, Asheville? He said, yeah, a few weeks ago. Didn't she tell you she went? I said, of course. She had not told me. We had texted that same weekend. She told me she was at home with a cold. In the car on the way home I did not mention it to Daniel. I watched the road. I counted things to keep my face neutral, street lights, turns, the number of red lights we hit. 4. We hit 4 red lights. When we got home I said I was tired and went upstairs. I lay on my side and waited until Daniel's breathing changed, and then I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours and thought about Asheville. I want to tell you that I found out cleanly. That I had one decisive moment of discovery that made everything clear. It wasn't like that. Came in pieces. Over 6 days. And each piece sat separately for a while before I let them connect. Piece 1, Daniel's gym. I drove past it on a Tuesday at 7:40 p.m. His car was not in the lot. I told myself he might have parked around the block. I drove around the block. I drove around 2 more blocks. I went home and said nothing. Piece 2. A credit card statement. Not snooping. Our finances were shared. The statement came to the house. A charge I didn't recognize. A restaurant in a neighborhood he'd never mentioned going to. A Saturday I'd been visiting my college friend in Pittsburgh. Piece 3, Priya's Instagram. I went through her posts, then her tag photos. For months back, a post from a winery. She was laughing at something off camera. Her hand was on the table. There was a second wine glass. She'd posted it on a Saturday. Daniel had told me he was at a work event that Saturday. I put my phone down. Picked it up again. I put it down again. I went for a walk. I walked for 45 minutes without a destination. I came back and I sat on the front steps and I thought, I need to know. Not because I want to, because I need to. I looked at Daniel's email on a Thursday morning while he was in the shower. I'm not going to walk around that. I did it. His password was a combination of our anniversary and his childhood dog's name. I knew it because I'd seen him type it once 2 years earlier when he asked me to check something while he drove. He'd never changed it. It took me less than a minute to find something. There was a thread. Not hidden, not in a separate folder. Just sitting in his inbox, labeled with her name, Priya. I did not read all of it that morning. I read 4 emails. That was enough. 4 emails was enough to tell me it had been going on for at least 22 months. 4 emails told me they had a system, a way of accounting for their time. 4 emails told me that she had, at one point, said she felt guilty about me. And that he had replied, don't. Layla's resilient. She'll be okay. Don't. Layla's resilient. I closed the browser. I went downstairs. Daniel came down 10 minutes later in his work clothes. I handed him a cup of coffee. He said thank you and kissed me on the cheek. I let him. I watched his car reverse out of the driveway. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor and I stayed there for a while. I did not tell anyone for 9 days. Not Marcus. Not my parents. Not my closest friend Sadia, who I had known since the 7th grade and who would have driven to my house immediately. No one. I want to explain why, because I think people expect that the first thing you do is call someone. For me it was the opposite. I needed to hold it alone first. Not because I was protecting anyone. Because I needed to understand the full shape of it before it became something other people also held. Once you tell someone, you can't untell them. The story becomes partly theirs. I wasn't ready for that. What I did in those 9 days was finish reading the emails. All of them. 22 months. That's how long the thread ran. It started 6 weeks after our 3rd wedding anniversary. I had made Daniel a cake that year, his favorite lemon with a cream cheese frosting, and we'd eaten it at the kitchen table and he'd said it was the best thing he'd ever had, and I'd laughed and said that was definitely not true, and he'd said no, I mean it. 6 weeks later. I read every email. I took notes. Not because I needed evidence. Because I needed the thing to be real. When something that big is trying to become real, sometimes you have to do something concrete to let it land. On day 9 I called Sadia. She answered on the 2nd ring. I said her name. She said what's wrong. I said everything. She said I'll be there in an hour. She was there in 40 minutes. Sadia brought food. She always brings food when something is wrong. It's her language. She brought enough for a week and she didn't say anything about it. She just started putting things in the refrigerator and I sat at the counter and watched her and thought I do not deserve this person. She sat across from me and I told her everything. Not in order. In the order it came out, which was messy and interrupted by long silences and one stretch where I couldn't finish a sentence for 3 minutes. She listened to all of it. She didn't flinch. She didn't say I saw this coming or are you sure or did you consider that maybe? She just listened and when I was done she said what do you need right now? I said I don't know. She said okay. Then she said have you talked to your parents? I said no. She said your mom is going to be devastated. I said I know. She said you have to tell them before you confront him or Priya because these things move and you don't want them finding out sideways. I said I know. She said do you want me there when you do? I said no. That one I have to do alone. She nodded like she understood something. Maybe she did. We sat there until almost midnight. She slept on my couch. I went upstairs and lay next to my husband and stared at the ceiling and practiced words I wasn't ready to say. I told my parents on a Saturday. I drove to their house. My dad answered the door and said this is a nice surprise and I thought, this is the last sentence he'll say before everything changes. We sat in the living room. My mom had made tea because my mom makes tea for every situation that involves sitting down. I held the mug and I told them. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed inward like something behind it had given way. She said Priya's name and then stopped. My father didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, you're sure? I said yes. He said how long? I said nearly 2 years. The silence after that had a weight to it. You could almost feel it pressing down on the furniture. My mother started crying and then stopped herself and then started again. My father went to the kitchen and came back with nothing. He just needed to leave the room for a moment. He sat back down. He looked at me and said, what do you need from us? Not what should we do about Priya. Not what are we going to say. What do you need from us? I think about that a lot. Even now. The instinct of a parent to put the hurt child first. I didn't cry in their living room. I cried in my car alone afterward in their driveway for about 15 minutes before I could drive. I confronted Daniel on a Tuesday. I chose a Tuesday because he worked from home on Tuesdays, which meant he'd have nowhere to be. No client meeting to rush to. No excuse to leave. Maeve was sorry, wrong story. I was alone in the house that morning. I waited for him to finish his first call. He came downstairs. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking. He said hey and started opening the fridge. I said I need to tell you something. He turned around. He looked at my face. He knew. I watched him know. The way a person goes very still when they realize the thing they were dreading has arrived. I said, I know about you and Priya. I've known for a while. I've read the emails. All of them. He closed the fridge. He said, Layla. I said, I don't need you to explain it. I need you to confirm it so I can stop wondering if I misread something. He said, you didn't misread anything. He sat down across from me. He looked like someone had removed the structure from inside him. All that steadiness, all that reliability just absent. I said, how did it start? He said, I don't think that helps you. I said, I didn't ask what helps me. I asked how it started. He told me, it started at my own birthday party, my 30th. Priya had helped organize it, a dinner at a restaurant, 12 people, fairy lights, the works. She had texted Daniel about the details for weeks. They'd stayed behind after to settle the bill. Started there. I had been 3 tables away when it started. I sat with that for a moment. I said, and you just kept going. He said, I know how that sounds. I said, I don't think you do. He said he was sorry. He said it multiple times in different arrangements. He said he didn't know how to stop. He said he knew that wasn't an answer. I said, did you love her? He didn't look away this time. He said, I thought I did. I'm not sure anymore. I said, were you planning to leave me? He said, no. He said it quickly like it was true and terrible at once. I said, that might be the worst answer. He didn't have a response to that. Neither did I for a moment. We just sat there in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning with the refrigerator humming and everything broken. I said, I want you out of the house by Friday. He said, okay. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. I don't know if I'm grateful for that or if it's one more thing I'll have to figure out how to file. Priya called me before I called her. She must have known something was happening. Maybe Daniel told her. Or maybe she felt the silence between us shift. She called on a Wednesday evening. I was sitting on the back porch. I let it ring. Then I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. She said my name and then she said, I know. I said, what do you know? She said, everything. I know you know. I said, tell me your version. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said it started as texts, that she told herself it was nothing, then told herself it would stop, then stopped telling herself anything for a while. I said, you were my maid of honor. She said, I know. I said, you gave a speech. She didn't say anything. I said, I need to ask you something and I need a real answer. I said, there was a time I was really struggling after my job was restructured. I called you crying. You talked to me for 2 hours. That was in the middle of all of this. She said yes. I said, how? She said, I don't know. I needed you to be okay. I needed to help you be okay. I said, while sleeping with my husband. She said, Layla. I said, I have to go. I hung up. I sat on the back porch until it was dark. I did not go inside until I was ready. Here is what I did not do. I did not want revenge. Not exactly. I want to be honest about what I felt because I think people expect a specific kind of fury and mine was more complicated than that. I was angry, but the anger was underneath something heavier. Something closer to grief but not quite grief. Something that lives in the place where love and betrayal share a wall. Priya was my sister. She is my sister. We shared a room until she was 12 and I was 15 and we finally convinced our parents we were too old for that. She was the person I called when I got into college. She was sitting next to me in the waiting room when I had a medical scare 3 years ago. The affair was a real thing. And so was all of that. I had to hold both and I didn't know how. What I did was call my therapist, a woman named Dr. Anand who I had seen briefly after the job loss and called again now. I got an appointment within the week. I sat on her small gray couch and said, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. She said, there's no supposed to. I said, I'm angry but I also miss my sister. She said, both of those can be true. I said, how? She said, because people are not reducible to the worst thing they've done. Neither are the relationships. I said okay. I didn't fully believe it, but I filed it somewhere I could find it later. The divorce was filed in June. Daniel and I had no children. We owned the apartment jointly. He offered to let me buy him out or sell and split. I asked for time to think. I took 4 days. I said sell. Not because I didn't want it. I did want it. I'd painted the living room myself and grown herbs in the kitchen window, and had the specific satisfaction of a place that felt like mine. But I also knew that staying meant every room would hold something I didn't want to carry. The kitchen table where we talked. The back porch where I'd sat the night everything changed. I moved into a smaller apartment across town. I put up my grandmother's mirror in the hallway. I bought a new couch. I made the space mine before I let it become mine, if that makes sense. Daniel and I handled the logistics through lawyers. We were civil. He texted once to ask how I was doing. I replied, getting there. He said good. That was the last personal exchange we had for months. He moved to another city eventually. I heard through Marcus. He's working there now. I don't know much more and I don't look for more than I know. Some doors you close and you don't peek through the edges. My parents did not cut Priya off. I want to say that clearly because I think some people expect that. The family choosing sides, the clean split. That's not what happened. My parents were heartbroken and furious and they told her so. My father told me he said things to her he'd never said to either of his children before. My mother didn't speak to her for 6 weeks. But she's their daughter. She's 29 years old and she did something terrible and she's still their daughter. I had to make peace with that. Or not peace exactly. I had to accept it without letting it be another wound on top of the wound. That took more work than I expected. My brother Marcus called her. I didn't ask him to. He told me afterward and I asked what he said. He said he told her that she'd broken something she might never get back, and that she needed to sit with that for a long time before she reached out to me. I said thank you. He said, "You're my sister first. Always." Marcus and I have never been dramatic about each other. He's not a big gesture person. That sentence was the most he'd said in that register in years. I cried in the parking lot of a grocery store. The ugly kind. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, my friend Sadia introduced me to someone. I want to be clear, I was not looking. I had spent almost a year actively not looking. I had watched myself very carefully to make sure I was moving towards something real and not running from something painful, which my therapist had flagged as a pattern to watch. His name is Ruben. He's a high school history teacher. He makes his own bread, which I found slightly suspicious at first because competent men who bake are statistically too good to be true. He's a little awkward at first and then not awkward at all. He asks follow-up questions. He admits when he doesn't know something. We had 4 dinners before anything shifted. On the 4th dinner I told him the outline of what happened, not everything, just enough. He listened. He didn't say I'm sorry in the way people say it when they're uncomfortable with the information. He just said, "That sounds exhausting to carry." I said it was. He said, "You don't have to carry it tonight." That sounds simple. It was the most generous thing anyone had said to me in a year. I'm not going to tell you we're some perfect ending. That's not how real life works. But he's kind in ways that feel reliable. And right now reliable is exactly the right shape. Priya sent a letter. Not a text. A letter. Handwritten for pages, arrived on a Friday. I knew her handwriting before I saw the return address. I put it on my kitchen counter and looked at it for 2 days before I opened it. She wrote that she had started therapy. She wrote that she understood if I never spoke to her again and that she was not writing to ask for forgiveness. She was writing because she needed me to know that she was aware, fully aware, of what she had done. Not just to me but to herself. She wrote, "I think I needed to destroy something precious to see if I was capable of surviving what came after. I know how that sounds. I know it doesn't make it better. I just needed you to know I'm looking at it clearly now." She wrote that she still thought about calling me at random moments. When something funny happened. When something scared her. She said she was working on finding other numbers to call. She didn't ask for a response. She ended it. "I love you. I'm sorry." Those 2 things are both completely true. I read it 3 times. I folded it and put it in my bedside drawer. I haven't responded. I haven't decided if I will. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I will be someday. I'm not making promises to anyone about that, including myself. There are things I've had to do the work of accepting. I'm going to say them plainly. 1, I didn't see it coming. I am someone who is good at patterns, at tracking, at finding the thing that's slightly off. And I did not see this coming, not until my body started logging it before my brain could. I've had to stop punishing myself for that. People see what they expect to see. I expected safety. That's not stupidity. That's love. 2, my sister is not reducible to what she did. That's still hard. There are days I feel it clearly and days I can't access it at all. My therapist says that's normal. I'm choosing to believe her. 3, I am angrier at Daniel than I fully admitted out loud. He was my husband. Priya was a person who made a terrible choice. Daniel made it every day for 22 months. He looked me in the face. He made me coffee. He said I was resilient, like that was a reason and not just a description. I'm working on that. For I am okay. Not completely, not always, but directionally. I moved into a smaller apartment and it became mine faster than I expected. I signed up for a ceramics class on a whim and I'm bad at it and I go every Thursday. Ruben came to the showcase and was genuinely enthusiastic about a lopsided bowl I made, which is either a sign of good character or low standards, and either way I'll take it. I'm 34 now. The apartment has good light in the mornings. I have a windowsill herb garden that is mostly thriving. The ceramics class meets on Thursdays and I'm still bad at it and I'm still going. My parents invited Priya to Christmas this year. They told me first and asked if I was okay with it. I said yes, and then I spent 2 weeks checking in with myself to make sure the yes was real. It was. Not because everything is fine, but because she is still my parents' child and I am not going to make them choose between their grief and their daughter. I didn't go to Christmas. That boundary I'm still holding. But here's the thing. My mother texted me a photo from that day. Priya at the kitchen table, and she looked the way she looks when she's actually tired, not perform tired, just the real thing. And I looked at it for longer than I expected to. I didn't block the number. I didn't text back. I just looked. Ruben asked me once what I wanted the next year to look like. Not 5 years, not forever. Just next year. I said quieter. I said I wanted it to be quieter and more mine. He said that sounds like exactly the right answer. Think he's right. The herbs are doing well. The ceramics are still lopsided. The apartment is mine. Some mornings I wake up and the first thing I feel is something close to okay. That's enough for now. That's actually more than enough. Thanks for listening.